In the right spot. Here we go. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for Brett. Can you hear me okay? Thumbs
We can
up?
hear you.
Awesome. Thank you. For those of you I haven't had the privilege to meet, welcome to this month's certified installment of To Catch a Fraudster. This webinar series, if this is your first time joining, is really meant to stimulate a conversation with us as a community, and the community of lenders and underwriters and title agency owners, operators, even closing attorneys around this trending issue that we find ourselves having to manage. And that's just the risk around safe and satisfying closings for our clients that are sending transactions in, but also the customers that they're hired to serve, meaning the buyers and sellers or investors or who it be. So with that, we're meant to have this as an engaging conversation. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A panel. That also helps us lead the direction of the conversation. Those of you, many of you know that this is meant to be a dialogue. It's meant to share fresh perspectives and ideas. And like you say, or like I mentioned earlier, trends around this evolving landscape that we find ourselves in. Great attendance this morning. I'm really excited. I was just scrolling through the list. There's so many friends and colleagues and thought leaders on the attendee list today, and I thank you guys. So to keep me on track, I'm just going to share my screen real quick here, and I'll toggle in between. We also have members of Alta on, so we're excited to support the Alta Good Deeds Foundation. So we are going to donate $20 to Alta Good Deeds for each participant that attends today. So Claudia's in the background, and she'll give me a total at the end, but can't say enough about the committee that sits on the good deeds, but also the impact that they have for our industry. So with that, today's agenda loosely, I'm going to introduce our special guests. I'm really excited about having Karen and Brett here, more on them in a second. Talk about Independence Title, which is one of the largest agencies in the country, and just a very, very well run. I would say we all aspire to have an operation running like Independence, not only from a longevity perspective, but culturally and tactically. And we're just going to get into just how they have faced this issue of wire fraud as a large agent, and know that, and Karen committed to this to me earlier, wire fraud is not a small agent or a large agent thing, and we're going to get into this. It's an all agents, each transaction risk that we need to really start to think about how to manage at scale, especially in markets like ours in Michigan. Here is a bifurcated market where you have sellers and buyers closing in completely different title companies. So with that, I want to introduce our speakers. Karen, I'm not going to do you justice at all, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Karen is a senior VP. Karen is all things ops, and we have Brett here, who's all things like financial and risk. And I love the fact that we have both of you today, because those two have to come together, right, to create a culture and to create a system and a solution in the organization and marketplaces to have success. So with that, Karen, I'm going to stop sharing my screen a second so you look a little bigger, and give us a background. Who do you blame for getting you in the title industry? I would like to lead off with that question.
Good morning. Thanks for having us here with y'all today. I got started in the title business because my husband is also in real estate, and he really seemed like he liked his real estate job. And I thought, well, why don't I get into real estate too and see what it's all about? So I started at a builder title company in the late 90s, and started right at the bottom, right at the front desk. I was printing title commitments and sticking them in a drawer, and I had no idea what title commitments even were. So I worked with them for a few years. I transferred over to a larger agent, Austin Title, here in the local Central Texas area, and worked with them as an assistant and then eventually an escrow officer until 2005, when I joined Jay Southworth and Brian Pittman when we formed Independence Title. And from there, I was escrow officer, escrow manager, and then eventually escrow manager for our escrow teams here on the admin side. So I've been here since our beginning. We grew from a really, really small company to, like you said, a fairly large operation here in Central Texas. We started with 8 branches, and now we're over 70. So we have a lot of escrow operations that we oversee and manage. But it's been an incredible, great ride ever since we started. It's changed a lot. And I expect it'll still keep changing for years to come.
Karen, I want to pull that thread a second, and Brett, I'm gonna hold you off just a couple more minutes. One, it sounds like you were that get it done department. So, you know, Lawrence and I had that. Let's start a title company back in 2005. We don't know anything about title. Oh, there's Karen.
Yeah.
Right? It's cool that you've been on the journey so long. When you say that things have changed, I'm just curious from your vantage point, what has been the most significant change? Let's call it leading up to COVID and kind of post-COVID.
You know, the way we communicate's probably been the biggest. If I have to look over my entire career, probably communication, in that, you know, it used to be all phone calls and faxes. And then it was phone calls and emails, and faxes kind of went away. And then it was phone calls and emails and text messages. And then COVID came along and everything went to emails and texts communication. So I think, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but, you know, losing that personal communication has been profound, I think. And that's something that we're actively working to get back to, so that we can be in more direct contact with our customers.
Do you think the loss is really preference?
I think it's just how life has evolved. Everybody has gotten so busy, and everybody works at such different times and paces that it's convenient. You know, you can email somebody back at midnight, or you can text someone back, you know, in the middle of the day, and not have to wait on a personal phone call. So I think it's just an evolution of everybody's communication style.
Yeah, it's interesting. And Brett, I promise you're next. But what's interesting and timely about this, Karen, is I was in front of, for those of you who don't know, I'm one of the owners of a large agency, Sun Title, in Michigan as well. And I'm sitting in front of a broker group yesterday, and they're talking about when they submit, when we deliver a commitment, our commitment summary, the email is just too long. And they say, look, I have as long as a red light is red to understand what you're communicating to me while I'm in my car. And I thought that was a great framing for the real estate community, because I actually think it's true. Red light, I'm in my car, get to the point, because I'm moving on to my next whatever the day looks like. So that, I just wanted to pull that thread aside, because I completely agree with you, but yet that creates another layer of challenges. We're trying to protect them, and we're trying to create this intimate relationship. I think the other thing interesting relative to communication is, and I don't know what you see, but the lack of demand for Ron post-closing versus when we were forced to do RIN or RON or this hybrid thing because of the gubernatorial separation mandates. And what we see is it's still very much a personal business, right? They want to have that contact all the way through to the end. So,
Agreed.
All right, drum roll. Brett, you're up, man. So Brett's all things, he's VP of Finance and Strategy. Brett, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got in the industry, and then kind of what your day-to-day looks like at Independence.
So, yeah, I got tricked into the industry. I think April 1st will be 10 years for me. So.
See, that's a bad joke. You can't make that up.
Well, yeah. I was told that, oh yeah, get into title. You'll just color maps, trade stocks, and shake hands all day. I was like, sign me up.
Wow, you fell for that?
I fell for that. It was a bad trick. Yeah, I came from an engineering. I used to be aerospace engineer, and got into title through family because didn't like working at the pace of the government, and wanted to get into business. And so real estate was attractive at the time, and I got into title back in New Mexico. Worked at a title company southeast part of New Mexico. It was right when TRID was going live, so we took them off of a DOS-based settlement system onto Resware, and it took a long time to develop all of that. So I ended up learning a lot about the industry very quickly. eventually moved to a different part of New Mexico under an investor who was buying every title company in the county and wanted me to combine them and run them. Did that for a couple of years, packaged those up, sold them, threw a dart on the map, and landed in Austin. And at the time, I was on the board for the New Mexico Land Title Association. I had known Brian Pittman through the associations and through Alta, and so gave him a call, and he said, "Well, we got plenty of work to do here." So landed at Independence about 3.5 years ago, and it's been a wild ride for the last 3.5 years. So
yeah, no, historically wild. Well, glad to have you in the industry. We need talent like you and Karen to help lead this thing forward. So well, tell us a little bit about, I'm going to share my screen again, about Independence as an organization. I know, Karen, you had mentioned like Central Texas area, but maybe a little more color on the organization itself to frame up the next part of the conversation.
Sure. Like I said, we started small with just 8 branch operations at the beginning, just here in Central Texas, here in Austin, and then rapidly moved to the San Antonio market, and then up to the Dallas market, and now into the Houston market. So we're in all of the 4 major markets in Texas. We have relationships with almost every county in Texas. So we can do closings in every county in Texas. We don't have branches in every county, but we can service almost any transaction that we get. And we do from small little rural land deals to big ginormous apartment complexes and hotels and convention centers. So we kind of have a very broad scope of deals that we do, and a lot of talent under our shingle of what we can do. Our title department is absolutely the best in Texas. I will believe that. It's headed up by Chad Decker, our chief title officer and division president, and he's phenomenal along with his team. So we've got a great group from top to bottom. Brian Pittman and Jay Southworth are amazing, and they've built an amazing company together.
Brett, you've been along for now a few years. How would you describe the organization?
Yeah, I mean, Texas was very different coming from New Mexico. I had my eyes opened up quite a bit, and coming from a plant state where competition is very low. It's somewhere like Austin where we have 200 title companies doing filings per month. It was a different way to see the business, and completely flipped everything I had known about the business model on its head. So it's been amazing to see how this company attracts such great talent and really puts the customer at the very, very top of the organization chart, and then solves the problems from there. We do everything that we can to take care of our customers in the best way, from having, this amazing education team that teaches like 300 CE classes a year, to having the graphics department, to having, data teams that have, so many tools that we can offer. And really, it's our business to grow our customers' business, and they take that so seriously. So it's been really interesting to have that lens, which I can tell coming from New Mexico was a different perspective on the industry. So that was eye-opening, but having that be the key decision maker when we key consideration for the decisions we make for the company is you can really see how it leads to getting the best talent here, getting the best products here, getting the best everything that we can to make that transaction be as seamless as possible for our customers.
Yeah, that must be a big part of the company. I can hear it in your voice. The company culture is really a solutions-based, experience-based for the customer. So that's amazing.
Yeah.
So flipping the script, and Karen, maybe I point this in your direction first. Let's speak to the topic of wire fraud or funds transfer loss. What was the first experience that maybe you have had with that? And I don't know how early days. For us in our agency, it was 2015 when we had our loss that ultimately led to the creation of certified and the company we've grown now. But tell me about your maybe early days of the issue of wire fraud.
So I came onto the admin team in 2017, and in late 2016, we were starting to talk about, educating customers, especially buyers, to be really careful when they wired money. But that's all it was. It was just a casual conversation that we were having. At the end of 2016, we kind of added some information to one of our information forms that asked a customer, are you bringing a cashier's check to closing, or are you going to wire your funds to closing? To just get an idea of what, where their thought was. And in 2017, we had a buyer who had filled out this form and said, we're going to bring a cashier's check to closing. And so at that point, we just kind of stopped the conversation. Great, they're going to bring a cashier's check. We don't need to do anything else. Well, this particular buyer decided at the last minute, because he got the typical urgent, threatening email that said, wire your money or else your closing's going to fall apart. You must do this now. And he fell for it, and he wired his money, and it was lost. And that was the first time I personally, on the admin team, had that kind of intimate experience with a customer about it. And it was devastating. It devastates the entire transaction. The file didn't close. The buyer didn't purchase. Most buyers don't have extra money that they can just plug into the transaction to get the deal closed. And, of course, everybody loses. The seller loses, the agents lose, the buyer, of course, loses, we lose, the mortgage can't be done. So that was when we decided that we needed to do some real distinct directed education to buyers. Hey, if you're going to wire money, here's the steps you need to follow. And, we started with print material and reminders. We added in a phone call to buyers that went over, here's what you need to look for. Here are the things that you need to be watching for, so this doesn't happen to you. And, from 2017 on through about 2020, it just ramped up so much. The attacks that buyers were under from people that had gotten into their emails and sending these urgent, threatening emails about, their closing being in jeopardy. They were, I think daily is probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but several times per week, we were notified that buyers were getting these. So it became a real concern. And that's when in 2020, 21, I think Brian really started exploring with y'all, what can we do to help protect our buyers? And we wanted a solution where we could tell them once and for all, you will not get an email from us that has wiring instructions. No more. That's done. This is the only way you can get them, and it's through certified and it's through their portal. So that's really, we thought at kind of the beginning of 2022, we had plugged that in. We were completely transitioned over to using certified in the platform. And for buyer money, we felt really good about having that. And that was our new message. You won't get wiring instructions for us via email. If you do, they're not from us. Stop and don't do anything further. So that was really kind of the origin when I inserted into the admin team of where wire fraud was and where we headed.
So Karen, I want to walk through the thought process. Let's go back to the end of 16.
Yeah.
Why was this a conversation internally? Were underwriters educating you on it? Were you hearing that competitive, how did it even hit the message board of leadership to say, oh, now there's one more thing we have to talk about and start to think about?
The underwriters are really good at communicating things that they hear nationwide and locally with us. But we were also getting feedback from some consumers who were transitioning from cashier's checks to wanting to wire for ease and speed and those kinds of things. And so I think just the ramp up of the desire to wire funds, and then some of the customer feedback that we got for those that were, looking closely enough at those emails to go, hey, this email doesn't quite look right. And I think lenders were getting on board too, to kind of give their customers a little forewarning, hey, you're going to get a lot of weird emails during this process, but just be careful and look before you respond. So I think that was kind of the beginning of all of us learning to look at our emails a little bit more closely.
Yeah, we were a year and a half ahead of maybe where you were, almost 2 years, because we got hit in our fraud from a title agency in the spring of 15. And going through that process, and then a couple of years of civil litigation in Bell County, Texas, of all places. Yeah,
that's where I live.
Whole cast of characters. There's some bad people down there.
Bad actors.
Company excluded. But at the end of the day, my partner and I said to ourselves, and even Tyler said, if they can find a way to get to buyers, this is a whole nother landscape, And sure enough, right, you start to see the seeds of that. Well, one more question, and Brett, I want you to weigh in on this as well. So Karen, you have this first instance in 2016 that led to a buyer loss. Why did you feel you needed to do anything on that? I mean, let's just assume that the email wasn't generated from your server. We're always spoofed, right? It's
right.
sun-title.com, independence-title or whatever, or some Google that's like escrow officer 56 at Gmail. How did you guys make maybe that connective tissue between this incident where somebody's just defrauded? People are defrauded all the time out of their money. And then something that you needed to respond to, I would argue, so proactively based on what you just said.
I think as a leadership group, we decided that if we didn't tell the buyers if we didn't tell them what to look for and what to be on the lookout for, how would they know? The realtors were just barely hearing about wire fraud, so they weren't really educating the buyers. Lenders were a little bit, but not very robustly. And I think we just felt like that we were in direct communication with the buyer. It was the relationship between them and us. They were sending us money. And I just think we felt a responsibility to try and help them protect themselves and to just say, hey, here are some steps you can follow. You can't protect everybody, but here's what we believe is the best thing you can do to protect yourselves. So I think, like back to Brett's point a few minutes ago, I just think we felt a responsibility to give the best customer service that we could, and we felt like that was what it was at the time.
I completely agree with that, and I applaud that. Brett, let's go to more of the tactical risk side of it. How do you think about the risk profile to the organization, or maybe to the goodwill? If it's not the P&L, there's something, right? Everybody pays either a dividend or a tax in life. There's taxing here on wire fraud. How do you think about it in the seat that you're in?
Well, let me start by talking about my first wire fraud event, and that was not an independent title. That was when I had my own company, and it wasn't a huge company. It was a good size. I think we're the largest in New Mexico by premiums, but I think Independence does pretty much the entire state of New Mexico in premiums. So, in retrospect, it wasn't that big. It was like 35 people, but we had an 8-figure commercial deal, and this was outbound. So the realtor on the transaction, we had, the same process that everyone had in place to do verbal callback. And he left the office from the closing. And I guess what had happened was the processor at the time said, I'm going to need your wiring instructions. And he said, okay, I'll shoot them right to you. Send me an email. And she shot him an email. And 5 minutes later, the wiring instructions came through, and we sent a wire off, and it was gone. And we didn't do a callback. I said, why don't you do a callback? She said, well, I just saw him 5 minutes ago. He just walked out. It was like justification. And, at that point, like, oh, I didn't need to do the callback because I just saw him. And at that point in time, this was a big enough sum that it wasn't going to tank the company into the ground, but it was, getting near the majority of the annual profit of the company in one single wire. and we were, again, probably largest as far as direct agents go, largest in premiums in the state, and one wire almost could have tanked us. And if we had been, when you look at the average size of the shops in the US, like that's really all it can take. It can take one mistake. And so when you're talking about how does it affect your P&Ls or how do you analyze it, it's like, well, for a lot of people, it could only take one, and that's it. And there's not, at the time, our E&O policy was very limited on what it would cover. And so it got into a pretty lengthy, battle that I won't get into those details on how it summed up, but it was scary enough. And so when we get here and we realize that our numbers are much bigger and we see fraud every single day, how do we analyze that? And what was interesting about the timing of when we implemented Certified as a solution is, go back to about the 2017 timeframe, like people still had POP3 email accounts. And I can't tell you how many wires we say, I'm sure everyone watching the call would agree, just because we knew that there were grammatical errors in the email, or the email followed such a consistent theme that, like, I'm on a boat, and, it was all these same things. It was like, we had so much benefit by just the ability for us to recognize that this is a script, or that this is broken English, and I'm going to pick up the phone and call. And like, that was our wire fraud protection. It was just like common sense. Look at the way that the email is written. And if some red flags start going off, pay extra attention. Well, nowadays, I know you had, we're talking about ChatGPT in a recent webinar here, but I can just sit there and hit regenerate all day long, and it'll produce a different story, and then the grammar will be perfect. And, if that technology had existed 4 years ago, before we had a solution in place, it would have been devastating to the industry. So I'm, glad to see that industry is combating on an equal and, greater technology level. But the timing was right that, if we were going to continue to rely on our old methods of just, hey, if any red flags pop up, pay extra attention, it wasn't going to work well. We needed technology to fight technology here in this solution. But thinking about it from a risk standpoint, of course, we use Certified because we want to improve security. Like, that's the foundational element that I think everyone would consider. Also, doing the math on, is it cost effective? When you get to a big enough company and your volume is large enough where you see things more often, and once you have years worth of data, maybe you can make a decision to say, oh, well, maybe we, saved more in wire fraud than we paid out in fees. But that's not really how we do the math here. We don't say, like, oh, which one's going to cost us less? This isn't the what's that ethics say, the Pinto project. We're not trying to come up with a net bottom line increase here, but we looked at it from a couple of other advantages. One, it saves time. From just an operational debt standpoint, the amount of time we invested in verifying instructions, getting callbacks, calling them, having to put the email on the phone, playing phone tag customers all day long, being able to have a solution in place where we have a secure portal where we can send and receive, saved an incredible amount of operational time for our teams in a time when things were very, very busy and we were looking for any avenue to save time. So that's something, and I don't want to make any claims here because I haven't done the math, but if I had to guess, the operational debt that we've saved alone has probably paid for the service. Karen, I don't know if you would agree with that or not.
I would.
Yeah.
And to your point, the manpower that it has saved has been tremendous.
Yeah. And then two other points are just reputational management of being able to say. So again, going back to the risk standpoint, I'm saying, when you ask Karen, why did she start doing this at that time? Well, there were a couple of things I remember, and I'll probably butcher the details because I don't remember them exactly, but I remember in Colorado, there was a lawsuit where someone, buyer had sent money to a fraudster, and they sued the title. The title company got drawn into the lawsuit. And I remember at that point, the attorney was picking on things on their website, like, we protect our customers, and using that sentence to say you were, now negligent because you made this claim to protect your customers. And I think their email was compromised. They ended up sending it somewhere else. So they got drug into a lawsuit there. And then two, lawsuit aside, that was also at a time where we were seeing headline after headline of the news. The media would go to the person's house and talk about it, and the title company would seem to take the blame on the headlines. And so, you didn't even have the benefit of a trial at that time. It was just, trial by publicity. And it wasn't looking good for the title company. So it was like, we need to do something here so that we don't end up on that front page. And then three, just from a competitive standpoint, I think it's easy to say at this point, once we spent the time, like Karen said, educating our customers and our realtors on why this is important. And I think, nowadays that's pretty well understood. Back in 2017, 2018, it was a little more difficult to tell them, why this extra step was important when all they had was their red light time to check an email. So we had to spend a lot of time in education, but at that time, just going forward and saying, like, look, we use a service to protect our customers' funds. If the title company, if the other title company you're using doesn't do that, then you need to take a real serious look if you're doing your customers the best benefit here by using a title company that's not willing to protect their customers' funds. So those are probably a list of some of the top considerations that we thought about when making a decision to implement, certified and everything we did at the time.
So Brett, I had heard there was just a private and fairly intimate conversation that I had with one of the underwriters regarding your loss. You didn't know I knew, but I knew the day after, and we were working to, I believe, to see if some of those funds could come back. You would have been one of our earliest funds recovery cases, but as I remember it, it was a large commission payment. It was a very large commission payment, and that's one of the benefits that we have is when we hear those different nuances or the texture of how this is evolving. Okay, where's the application, for the solution or the education around this to prevent that? So I want to address a question, and I want to dive a little bit deeper into this discussion. So Brenda had submitted a question that says, how does the news of a purchase become knowledgeable so quickly? And she accurately points out that it seems like the buyer signs the contract and they're getting solicited the next day or several hours after. So Brenda, the framing of real estate as it relates to wire fraud or the technical cybercrime term is business email compromise is very popular, and I'll answer the question through this explanation, is because it is so public, because of the MLS, multiple listing service, and then the syndication of that data to other sites like Realtor and Trulia and Zillow. Part of the duties of a real estate agent is to open up a marketing envelope, right? So the idea of a listing agent, one of the biggest duties is, was this an open market process? Well, to do that, you got to say to the world, hey, Brett's selling his house and I'm representing him. So unlike any other transaction, literally, love the mug, Brett, any other transaction, literally, in the United States, real estate is unique because in real time, the transaction itself, the solicitation for offers is put out there every single minute of every day by way of listings that are signed and put up on multiple listing services. So I mean, that's the deal board, and it's curated in real time. And then all of a sudden, Brett's agent finds Karen's agent, and Karen puts in an offer, and then that listing goes pending. Well, now they've got an active transaction, and on average, they got about 37 days to figure out, how do I get in the middle of Karen or Brett? And they actually don't care. They don't care if they're going to defraud Karen on an EMD or a larger cash to close or a cash payment. They don't care if they divert Brett's agent's commission or Brett's net after closing through a wire. And that's how they get to them. We've been involved in recoveries. State of New York, this is probably the first several months that we started to activate and assist victims. There was a buyer working with a closing attorney, and they had submitted an offer. The seller counter offered, The buyer had not signed the counter offer, so there was no formal purchase agreement. The closing attorney's email was compromised. There was a request for a wire, and the guy wired $160,000 of his down payment, and the purchase agreement hadn't been fully consummated. So that's early, really early. We've seen fraudsters that have made up fake statutes. One was in the state of Ohio. Per the state of Ohio whatever law, we have to get these closing funds in 30 days before closing, and it looks like your closing date, because they're reading it in somebody's email account, is this. We need to get you the money. So the answer to the question is because they're in somebody's email account and they know the transaction, they understand the domain, they can create a closing statement, they can read a preliminary CD or a final CD, right? They can mock that up, they can take a mortgage payoff, they can calculate per diem, they can even calculate what the payment is and how that affects a pour over into the next month. Like, we're there in the land of, do they understand what we're doing and how we do it? Dead accuracy, right? So from that, I mean, anything you guys want to pile onto that question?
Yeah. I mean, one thing I want to add too is getting away from the idea that, you know, this is someone sitting in the basement with a computer. This is a different type of fraud, but a video I highly recommend anyone in this industry to watch. There's a YouTuber named Mark Robert. Everyone may know him as the glitter bomb guy, and every Christmas he builds these fancy packages that I think they're called porch pirates, would steal when they're stealing packages off. They open it up and it throws glitter everywhere, and then, you know, sends the police the location of it. And in doing that, he ended up uncovering a different type of fraud. And this was a call center fraud where you get scam calls and you end up providing information, maybe sending some money. And this YouTuber ended up following this down to a pretty sophisticated level. He hired people to go undercover and work at these call centers in India and followed them with cameras and everything. And he started to he ended up hacking into their CCTV to be able to watch the security cameras of inside the place, and was tracking people. And it's an interesting video. It's called Pranks Destroy Scam Callers on YouTube. It's by Mark Robert. And it's about 30 minutes long. But in that video, you start to understand that these are very large organizations with departments and org charts and hierarchies and everything. And they have people that show up every day, and their only job is to get access to an email account. And once they have done that, they move it on to the next department. And the next department may have active live listings that that they know are in the area, and then there'll be someone that will glue those two together, and then there'll be someone called the closer who actually does all the impersonation and is sending the emails. They'll have an IT team who sets up all of the rules on the mailbox. This isn't one person in a basement. This is a very sophisticated organization that is just as good at what they do as we are at what we do, and that's why it's so consistent. That's why it's so sophisticated. And that's why when you see one thing work somewhere, like we're seeing a lot of absentee seller fraud, you start to see it everywhere, because it's not an individual. These are organizations, and that's why it has to be combated so aggressively. So when we say like, oh, it's just amazing how somebody found out so quickly that something happened, it's like, well, not the first time, but eventually they figured it out, and then they built a system around it. And that's why it's so important that as soon as we start to see these trends, that we combat those trends aggressively and quickly, because when something works once, we can expect to see it more.
Karen, anything to add to that? I think spot on, Brett.
Yeah, no, I think Brett is spot on, and you are too, Tom. Back in 2017, really all we knew to tell our escrow teams was to look for the things like the bad grammar and the weird sentencing and the weird phrasing. That's all we really had. And we can no longer rely on that. These are professional people who are deeply embedded in our business, real estate and mortgage. And they have really perfected how to pull the scam down. So we cannot rely anymore just on our human instinct. We had to move to some technology to assist us in that. And that's, really where certified you guys came in so strong for us and are so strong for us right now in this seller absentee fraud that Brett just mentioned.
So let's dive into that before we wrap this thing. I want to have two more concepts. One, what are trends that we're seeing as far as the fraud landscape? And I'll maybe weigh in on this as well. And then secondly, what's working? And then what's keeping you up at night? Because there's never 100% security, right? That just doesn't, that's just the landscape that we're in right now. You had mentioned, Karen, this idea that COVID really drove a shift from any impersonal to a digital platform. It even happened in payments. I mean, everybody thought ACHs would die by the time we got to 2022. They went up 21 and 2022. And everybody's like, oh, you know, and then you have people that you'd never think would have access to Zelle or Venmo. And all of a sudden it's like, sure, I'll send you an electronic payment, you know, no problem. So as far as current trends, what are you seeing as far as like the evolution? And maybe let's take the persona. So what trends are you seeing as far as incoming funds threats or the threat to safely transferring inbound on a file, and then that relating to a disbursement side outbound?
So like I said, in 2017, you know, our focus really was on our buyers, of giving them a message that they needed to protect themselves and be diligent before they sent us money. And, you know, Certified, when we onboarded Certified, that was our goal, to be able to tell buyers, we will not send you instructions any longer by email. That was earlier 2022, May, June 2022. The trend currently that we started to experience in late 2022, and something we had really always been very confident about, which was our disbursements out to our sellers, because we knew our sellers, right? We had gotten information from them. We were communicating with them. You know, COVID, like you said, shifted us to a more remote experience, but we still felt like we had a really good connection with those sellers, until we realized that we were actually talking in a couple of cases to fake sellers who looked like the real sellers. They had the right credentials, they had the right IDs, they had all the right things to say about why they weren't coming into our office to sign, why they couldn't get on the phone. And that's when we started to realize that we could no longer just rely on a phone call to verify a disbursement, because we were probably talking to the bad guy. We needed a layer to be able to send to them and say, you tell us that you're this person, but you're going to have to show some evidence that you are. And here's one of the tools that we're using, which is Certified. And, you know, November to now, that has absolutely been a huge focus for my group, especially. We have a team of people that actively are looking at these target type transactions, which, like Brett mentioned, are absentee sellers, vacant land deals, deals where nobody knows the seller. You know, it just popped up on Zillow and it's for sale by owner, and hey, it's a great deal, Mr. Buyer wants to buy it. So, you know, those are the deals right now we're really focused on and really working to try and identify early on in the deal.
Brett, go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that you know, keeps me up at night is, and Tom, you may have the data on this, but in my experience, when there is an instance of wire fraud, you find out in 3 days or less. Hopefully much quicker, but usually by the third day, someone's saying, you know, where's my money? At least on the outbound. On the inbound, maybe a little bit longer. On the absentee seller fraud, if successful, the timeline is completely undetermined.
Yeah,
if this is point. Someone's, you know, if they own, you know, lots of lots or land or second homes in lots of different areas, and they're not traveling right now, I mean, there's really no telling. It's a new enough trend that we really don't know the answer. There's no telling how long it's going to be before the real prior owner seller, you know, comes by and says, why is someone building a house on my lot? that hasn't happened, but to us, but that's something that keeps me up at night, because we do know that in the cases we've seen, it can be a while before it's discovered. It's usually by, like, so far the ones we've seen is maybe someone's nephew driving by and seeing the sign in the yard or something. We've even had cases where we've called the realtor and we've known, because we've contacted the authorized seller and said, no, like, that lot is not for sale, and the current listing agreement is with a fraudster. And we'll even call the agent and they're not going to back down. We'll say, nope, I'm not taking it off. I've got a signed listing agreement. So we have a lot of education to do there. But that one keeps me up at night a little more, because the timeline is so unknown. It really is determined on when the true owner is ultimately going to visit their property and find out. And so we have retroactively examined many transactions to as a risk mitigation effort on our end to make sure that when the trend started, we looked backwards for quite a ways and then did some reauthorization. But that's one that scares me.
Yeah, I agree, bro, with that you're right. The timing can be horrific, because it could be months before the actual seller has any idea that lot is gone.
Yeah.
So we have some very robust education pieces that we're working in our realtor communities on about that topic.
And for the viewers on the call, I still recommend it. That when the first instance pops up in our organization, again, the trend started hitting and we started seeing many of them, and thankfully we've caught so many, but it's entirely theoretically possible that one had made it through that we don't know about. And so for those on the call, I would, and Karen, I don't know if you even have a list of like the top bullet points, but I'd say, go examine your closings retroactively for a period of time. It's not only vacant lots. We're seeing it with vacant homes as well, but especially with vacant lots, going and running through a checklist on some of the prior closings, just to, make sure, because there's the potential for fraud still exists on something you may have closed within the last 3 or 4 months at this point.
Yeah, it's a tale of risk. And I share that point of view in our title operations. One of the things that we started to do is with any seller that was not going to attend a closing in person, we are, at the time the commitment is delivered, essentially sending certified to validate the identity and gather the bank credentials, just in case they do want a wire for the disbursement proceeds. But it gives us an enablement tool to really vet that ID. And I think that's the landscape, that's the battleground over the next several years, is the ability to confirm that we are dealing with who we think we're dealing with.
Yeah.
Isn't it funny that in our industry, nationwide, we historically have not, we're one of the only parties in a transaction not to request IDs up front.
Right.
And it's just, it's been that way, and people laugh at it, but very few people have, done anything to implement it, because it's difficult and you don't want to be overly inconvenient to anyone. But we are finally at the point to where we are launching within the next 60 days some rigorous identity verification very early on in the transaction.
Yeah.
And that's how we're doing it now, but we're I guess implementing an integrated workflow for it very soon here, and that's one of the ways that we're fighting it.
Well, because the investment, what's interesting, and you'll see stats that we're going to share, and the IC3 report will come out soon with the FBI, is wire fraud is how they monetize the social engineering. So the crime's already taken place before the wire went out, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the loss vector. But the fact that they hacked into somebody's intellectual property, the email, and they set up this persona to impersonate, that's the social engineering piece of it. The wires are destined to fail. For those of you that may or may not know, wire fraud isn't hey, I'm stealing a wire between bank A and bank B as it's going through the Federal Reserve. That's a black box. That doesn't happen, thank the Lord, so far. That's not the problem. The problem is they're getting so incredibly sophisticated and so timely in how they're approaching somebody that is about ready to release that wire, that they just, the disarmament of all the guards to say, well, sure, it's Brett. I just talked to him, sure, we just had this exchange. I know he's on vacation. Look at his Facebook, right? They've been posting pictures all week. Of course they're there, right? I'm just trying to accommodate now. And it's unfortunately that blend of accommodation and the fact that we're just trying to do our jobs. And for those of you that are, in the transaction, it is a sea change on educating the referral partner to provide details that allow us to curate and close out the story. We need to know who they are, and we need to make sure that they are who they say they are, especially on these that are coming in. I call it the too good to be true type things, right?
Yeah.
Really? Have you met this person? Nope, they just called me, they emailed me, blah, blah, blah. So we're doing not only the technology is certified, but we're also asking those questions up front. And to your point, Brett, I'm sure you told that listing agent, good luck, man, but don't send us the contract. Like, I don't want anything to do with, 1, 2, 3 scammer drive here because it's not going to end well. So yeah, what has worked? So two more questions. What, in addition to certified, are you doing to get the word out? Are you recruiting, and how are you recruiting early days of a transaction, the real estate agent or the lender or the closing attorney? And then last question I'll have is, like, what's keeping one eye open at night here? What are you really concerned about that maybe we haven't thought through or solved yet fully as an industry?
I think to the realtor community, we're again trying to educate them that this even exists, because there's a lot of realtors still that don't know the seller side piece of the potential, gap of identity. In our education pieces, we're with our escrow teams, we have a solid list of things that they have to go through when we get one of these potential fraudulent deals. We don't share that outside the company because we don't, for lack of a better idea, we don't want to create a path for these bad guys to follow. Hey, here's how we're catching you. These are the steps we're going to take.
Right.
But we have several, certified being one of them, that we get out early in the transaction. We have a couple other technology pieces that we're using to help verify those identities. Like Brett said too, we have a new one coming on board. So, to the realtors, we're just telling them, if it's too good to be true, if it does drop in your lap, just let's ask some questions. We will certainly help participate in that, but they've got to be the first line to look at that and say, this just does not seem, feel, or look right. And if they get one of those deals, to just kind of pause and look and see, is this really something I want to risk moving forward with? Honestly, the piece that worries me a lot these days is that a lot of the technology pieces that we have, they kind of get stuck at our borders as far as crossing outside of the United States. Here in Central Texas, we have a lot, because of the universities we have here, we have a lot of foreign owners of property, and we're really challenged with some of those because we kind of run into a brick wall of how do we vet those folks. So I hope coming soon we have some technology that will help us there and just really kind of fortify that piece. I feel good about the US based pieces, but it's those foreign pieces that do keep me up a little bit at night, because we handle quite a few of them here through our organization.
Yeah, very fair. Brett, what about your end?
Sometimes I'm afraid to say it out loud because it's unexploited, and I don't want this information to get in the wrong hands. But I think we're safe here, right? We're nothing but title people watching this. Something that scared me for the last, maybe 5-6 years that seems to be unexploited is they thankfully have not figured out how easy it is to steal an LLC. because that stops with the Secretary of State. So you can give me any ID you want to and an operating agreement that in many states is not filed, or if it's filed is not publicly available, claiming that you're the sole member of this LLC. And in a lot of states, not only do I not have any way to verify that, but the state doesn't either. There are plenty of states where the only record they have is the name of the LLC and the registered agent. And if that's someone like TurboTax, good luck. Because if we see a lot of, LLCs holding property, how do we verify the identity? It's like, okay, you can verify the identity of a person. How do you verify the member ownership of the LLC? Thankfully, it's to this day unexploited. To my knowledge, I have not heard many cases of that, but it keeps me up because that one, I'm not sure what the solution is. It starts with the government level and times 50. So that one scares me a little bit, but I wouldn't be surprised if it pops up at some point. And so, I'd love to be forward thinking there as well.
Well, we've seen it on the mortgage payoff side where they will create an entity in a state different from, let's say, the mortgage servicer and their state of domicile or incorporation. And then they'll file it, because to your point, I could file a Michigan LLC before we end this webinar, literally, right? Simple form. You put in a little blurb. Yep, I attest I'm so-and-so. That's it, man. $50. And I'll get a response probably tomorrow saying, hey, congrats, here's your LLC. And the tie back to me really doesn't come, there's no social security number. There's nothing that I give personally. I don't even give a personal address. I can give a PO box as the registered agent. I could even click, I'm filing this for somebody else. There's no attachment to me until I get a K-1 or I file my federal return. And that's a tax thing. Well, the tail on that, the scam's already done, right? Mm-hmm. Especially if it's newly created. So what we've seen is they create these LLCs under the name of that servicer in a different state. And then they go open a bank account because you can get a federal ID number 5 seconds later from the IRS, and then they're off to the races. But it would also be just as easy to do a search for all, vacant lots owned by an LLC as for absentee sellers, since this is the trend. And then at that point, it's like, it's going to add one more layer of complexity where we can, again, verify the identity of them. But how do we verify that they're the member, the owner of the LLC? And so that, I feel like, I wouldn't be surprised if the trend heads that direction as well. Yeah, I think the other big trend we're seeing is just the recruitment of money mules and the sophistication of money laundering. I mean, these people are recruited, and they honestly believe that they're in a dating relationship, that they're working from home for some finance department of a global company, that they're contributing to, the Lord's work in some charity in a third world country. And when the bubble gets essentially burst because they're receiving money, and we're able to, with federal law enforcement, kind of cascade the truth to them, more and more they're saying, well, no, you must be a scammer. Like that can't be the case, because I've been in this romantic relationship online for months and months and months, and he or she is this and that, and it's just horrifically sad. Like I'll echo, Brett, what you said. These are sophisticated people. This is an enterprise mechanism, and they'll swap out people, they'll swap out departments, they'll swap out talent, but the machine is just continuing to try to pierce through those 2 points in a workflow, right? Karen, we were talking about it. What do we have? 80, maybe 90 pieces in a workflow, that are meaningful to get from A to B. And they have two. I got an incoming and then I got an outgoing. If I can't get it here, I'll try to get it there. So and I'm concerned as well, Brett, you mentioned, but the Chat GPT and just like the intelligence, I call it like almost quantum computing for social engineering that we're starting to see them use is going to mean that our email filters, unfortunately, and our personal human filters that we used to say, hey, it's kindly, or it's broken English, or lowercase I, or look at the spacing, or whatever. It's not that anymore. It's better than we would draft. sometimes I try to draft an email and then I ask GPT and I'm like, yeah, I'll use that one. Even though I went to law school, I didn't actually learn how to write. All right, guys, any parting thoughts? I want to end on time and be respectful, but this is a fascinating conversation.
My parting thought would just be to tag on to what Brett was saying. We've been talking about absentee seller vacant land deals. I absolutely believe the next phase will be just absentee sellers, period. Second homes, vacation homes, rental homes. So, to any realtors out there listening, just don't focus on one kind of transaction. Just kind of open your mind and ask more questions on every deal, and just make sure you're dealing with the right people.
Yep, vetting the deal up front. I couldn't agree more. Brett, any closing thoughts?
No, the last thing I'll say is just that, this is honestly not a service that we want to be competitive with other title companies on. We want to see everyone win here.
Yeah,
This makes the industry look bad when somebody loses, and it makes the industry look good when we save. So I hope that this webinar and all the others have been helpful in allowing people to take action within their own companies to implement something, because we all want to win this game. So, well,
appreciate both of you, because you're modeling the traits and the behavior of what success looks like in this. And I can tell you, and I know it's a daily battle. It's never won. So for those of you that want to connect with our team and learn more about what we're doing at Certified, certified.com, request a demo, and we'd love to connect you with the now plethora of products and services that we offer around this. And then happy to announce, Claudia gave me a total $2,800 will be donated to
awesome
the Good Deeds Fund. So that's I'm sure that will be put to very good use with the stewardship of Alta and that program. So with that, guys, we'll wrap. Karen and Brett, thank you so much, not only for your loyalty as a customer, but just the impact that you're having in the local and national community that you serve. So,
well, thanks for having us, Tom.
Yes, take care. See you guys.
Thank you.